The police cruiser's red and blue lights painted my wedding decorations in carnival colors as Officer Martinez stepped out, his hand resting on his radio. 200 guests sat frozen in their white folding chairs, my bride Emily clutching her bouquet so tight her knuckles had gone white, and HOA President Victoria Blackwood standing at my property line with a satisfied smirk that made my blood boil. "Sir, we've received complaints about an unpermitted public gathering," Martinez said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I'm going to need to see your event permits." Behind Victoria stood the entire HOA board like vultures in their matching navy blazers, each one holding a stack of papers that I knew contained citations, violation notices, and probably an injunction to shut down my wedding. The September sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the pasture where I'd planned to marry the love of my life in exactly 47 minutes. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the unpermitted gathering she'd reported was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. Because in exactly 30 minutes, when the county judge arrived to perform the ceremony, Victoria Blackwood was going to learn why you never mess with someone who processes every permit, citation, and legal document that crosses a county clerk's desk. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 8 months to the day I bought the property that would change everything. The Riverside Ranch had been abandoned for 3 years when I found it 47 acres of rolling pasture, a restored 1,920s farmhouse, and a red barn that looked like it belonged on a postcard. The previous owner, old Pete Hendricks, had fallen behind on taxes after his wife died, and the county was quietly looking to sell. As deputy county clerk, I had early access to tax sale listings. It's one of the few perks of a job that pays terrible and requires you to deal with angry people all day. When I saw Pete's ranch on the list, I knew it was perfect. Not just for me, but for Emily and the life we wanted to build together. Emily and I had been dating for 4 years, living in a cramped apartment above the bakery she managed in town. She'd grown up on a farm before her parents lost it to bankruptcy, and every time we drove past the old Hendricks place, she'd get this wistful look in her eyes. "Someday," she'd say, "I want to have a garden again, and maybe some chickens." I bought the ranch in February for back taxes $38,000 that wiped out my savings but felt like the best investment I'd ever made. Emily cried when I showed her the deed with both our names on it. We spent our weekends that spring cleaning up the property, painting the farmhouse, and planning the wedding we'd have right there in the pasture where wildflowers grew between the fence posts. That's when I got my first letter from the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. The letter was delivered by certified mail, typed on cream-colored letterhead with a gold embossed logo. Victoria Blackwood's signature was a work of art, all loops and flourishes, that probably took her longer to write than the message itself. "Dear new resident, welcome to the Riverside Estates community. Please be advised that all property modifications, landscaping changes, and exterior improvements must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval. We look forward to working with you to maintain our community's high standards." I read it twice, then walked outside and looked around. The nearest house was a quarter-mile away through the trees. My property was surrounded by ranch land and state forest. What community? What high standards? I called the county assessor's office, my own office, and pulled the HOA filing documents. The Riverside Estates Homeowners Association had been incorporated in 2019, 2 years after a developer bought the land adjacent to Pete's ranch and built 12 custom homes on 5-acre lots. Somehow, they'd managed to include Pete's property in their HOA boundaries without his knowledge or consent. It was a bureaucratic trick I'd seen before, including existing properties in new HOA boundaries by claiming they were part of the greater community development. Most people never bothered to check the legal documents until it was too late. But I wasn't most people. I spent my days reading legal documents, processing deed transfers, and understanding property law. Victoria Blackwood had just picked a fight with someone who knew exactly how to fight back. The harassment started small. A citation for unapproved livestock because we'd bought 6 chickens for Emily's co-op. Another for non-regulation fencing because Pete's old barbed wire didn't match the white vinyl fencing around the new development. A third for landscaping violations because we'd planted vegetables instead of maintaining a manicured lawn. Each citation came with a $50 fine and a threat of legal action if we didn't comply within 30 days. Each certified letter cost them postage and processing fees, but they seem to have an unlimited budget for harassment. They can't actually enforce this stuff, can they? Emily asked one evening, sorting through the latest batch of violation notices. They can try, I said, but they picked the wrong person to mess with. The real escalation began when we announced our wedding date. Emily wanted a simple ceremony in the pasture, with dinner in the barn and dancing under the stars. We'd invite our families, a few close friends, maybe 60 people total. Nothing fancy, just a celebration of love in the place we wanted to call home. Victoria's response arrived within a week. Dear Mr. Morrison, it has come to our attention that you are planning a commercial event on residential property without proper permits or HOA approval. The Riverside Estates CC&Rs strictly prohibit commercial activities, including but not limited to weddings, parties, and gatherings exceeding immediate family members. Commercial event? It was my wedding on my own property. But attached to Victoria's letter was a copy of the CC&R's 37 pages of small print regulations that supposedly governed everything from mailbox colors to the number of guests you could have for dinner. I spent that night reading every word. The document was a masterpiece of legal overreach, written by lawyers who specialized in maximum control with minimum accountability. According to the CC&Rs, any gathering of more than immediate family members required HOA approval and compliance with noise ordinances, parking restrictions, and public assembly regulations. The kicker was buried on page 23. Violations could result in daily fines up to $500, plus legal fees and costs of enforcement. They weren't just trying to stop my wedding, they were trying to bankrupt me if I resisted. That's when I made the phone call that would change everything. County Attorney's Office. This is Rebecca. Hey Becca, it's Tom Morrison from the clerk's office. I need to speak with David about an HOA issue. David Chen had been the county attorney for 12 years, and we'd worked together on dozens of cases involving property disputes, deed problems, and municipal violations. He was also a good friend who'd been invited to my wedding. Tom, what's going on? I explained the situation, the questionable HOA boundaries, the harassment campaign, and now the threat to shut down my wedding. David listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, documents, and legal procedures. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Victoria Blackwood may have made some very expensive mistakes. And Tom? Don't cancel your wedding. We're going to make sure it happens exactly as planned. Over the next 3 days, David's office conducted what he called a preliminary review of the Riverside Estates HOA. What they found was a pattern of legal violations that went far beyond just including my property without consent. The HOA had been filing violation notices without proper service procedures. They'd been imposing fines without following due process requirements. Most damaging of all, they'd been claiming authority over properties that were never legally part of their development. But David's review also revealed something else. Victoria Blackwood had been using her position as HOA president to approve construction projects for her friends while blocking permits for people she didn't like. She'd created a shadow permitting process that bypassed county regulations entirely. This isn't just about your wedding, David explained during our meeting Thursday morning. This is about an HOA that thinks it's above county law. What can we do? David smiled. We can remind them that county law trumps HOA rules every single time. The next escalation came exactly 1 week before my wedding. Victoria arrived at my property with a process server and a temporary restraining order signed by Judge Patricia Coleman, Victoria's sister-in-law. Mr. Morrison, the process server announced, you are hereby enjoined from conducting any public gathering, commercial activity, or event exceeding 6 persons on this property, pending resolution of HOA compliance issues. Emily was working in her garden when they served the papers. I watched her face crumble as she realized what this meant. Our wedding, planned for months, might not happen at all. Victoria stood behind the process server with that same satisfied smirk, probably savoring what she thought was her moment of victory. You should have just followed the rules, Tom, she called out sweetly. Now you get to explain to your guests why there won't be a wedding after all. That night, Emily cried herself to sleep while I sat at the kitchen table, reading and rereading the restraining order. Judge Coleman had signed it without a hearing, based entirely on Victoria's claims about unpermitted commercial activity and public safety concerns. But as I read the legal language, I noticed something interesting. The restraining order specifically prohibited commercial activity and public gatherings exceeding 6 persons. It said nothing about weddings performed by county officials on private property with proper permits. I called David Chen at home. David, hypothetically, if someone had all the proper county permits for a private event, would an HOA restraining order override county authority? Hypothetically, hell no. County jurisdiction trumps HOA authority every time. Why? Because I think Victoria Blackwood just made her biggest mistake yet. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 8 years as deputy county clerk. I used my administrative authority to fast-track my own permit applications. Emergency event permit for a private wedding ceremony. Temporary occupancy permit for the barn reception. Parking variance for overflow vehicles on private property. Music permit for outdoor entertainment. Every permit was properly filed, properly processed, and properly approved through official county channels. I paid all the fees, submitted all the required documentation, and followed every procedure exactly as written. By noon Friday, 24 hours before my wedding, I had a stack of official county permits that superseded any HOA authority over my property. But I wasn't done yet. I also filed a formal complaint with the county attorney's office alleging HOA fraud, unlawful restraint of trade, and violation of due process rights. I requested an immediate investigation into Victoria Blackwood's pattern of harassment and abuse of authority. And then I did the one thing that would guarantee Victoria's downfall. I scheduled an emergency hearing for Saturday afternoon, right after my wedding ceremony, to challenge the restraining order and present evidence of HOA misconduct. Judge Coleman would have to recuse herself due to conflict of interest. The hearing would be assigned to Judge Robert Hayes, who had zero tolerance for frivolous legal actions and personal vendettas. Friday evening, I hand-delivered an invitation to Victoria's house. Not a wedding invitation, a court summons for Saturday's emergency hearing. Her husband answered the door. Victoria's not available right now. Just make sure she gets this, I said, handing him the summons. She'll want to have a lawyer present tomorrow afternoon. Saturday morning dawned perfect for a wedding. Clear skies, gentle breeze, temperature in the mid-70s. Emily looked radiant in her grandmother's dress, her hair adorned with wildflowers we'd picked from our own pasture. Our families began arriving around 4 p.m., followed by friends from town, co-workers from the courthouse, and neighbors who'd been following our battle with the HOA. By 5:30, we had nearly 200 people gathered in the pasture, sitting in white folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a simple arch decorated with sunflowers and baby's breath. That's when Victoria arrived with her cavalry, the entire HOA board, a new process server, and what looked like additional court documents. But she'd also brought something I hadn't expected: Officer Martinez and his patrol car. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced in a voice that carried across the entire gathering, "this illegal assembly is in violation of a court order and county regulations. These people are trespassing on HOA-regulated property." The crowd murmured nervously. Emily grabbed my hand, her wedding dress rustling in the breeze. Our families looked confused and embarrassed. Officer Martinez approached with professional courtesy but obvious reluctance. "Sir, I've received reports of an unpermitted gathering. I need to see your event permits." This was Victoria's masterstroke. She'd called in law enforcement to shut down my wedding in front of 200 witnesses. She probably thought I'd fold under the pressure, cancel the ceremony, and give up the fight entirely. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my stack of county permits. "Officer Martinez, here are my permits. Emergency Event Permit Number 2024-847, approved yesterday by the County Clerk's Office for a private wedding ceremony. Temporary Occupancy Permit for the barn reception. Parking variance for overflow vehicles. Music Permit for outdoor entertainment." Martinez examined each document carefully, his expression shifting from concern to confusion to what looked like amusement. "These permits appear to be in order," he announced. "This is a legally permitted private event on private property." Victoria's smirk vanished. "But the restraining order—" "Ma'am, county permits supersede HOA regulations," Martinez explained patiently. "If you have an issue with legally permitted activities, you'll need to take it up with the county. But this property is part of our HOA. We have authority." That's when I played my ace card. "Actually, Victoria, my property was never legally included in your HOA boundaries." I pulled out David Chen's legal analysis, which I'd been saving for exactly this moment. "The county attorney's office has determined that the original incorporation documents were filed incorrectly. My property was included without proper notice or consent, making your claimed authority fraudulent." The crowd had gone completely silent. Emily was staring at me with wonder and love and amazement. Our families were realizing they were witnessing something much bigger than a wedding ceremony. Victoria's face cycled through confusion, anger, and what looked like the beginning stages of panic. You can't just..." "The county attorney has scheduled an emergency hearing for this afternoon to address your pattern of harassment and fraudulent enforcement," I continued. "You'll want to have legal representation present." Officer Martinez was trying not to smile. "Ma'am, it sounds like you folks have some legal issues to work out. But this wedding has proper permits and is taking place on private property. I suggest you contact your attorney." Victoria stood frozen for a moment, surrounded by her HOA board members, who were suddenly looking at her like she might be radioactive. Then she turned and stalked back to her car, the entire board trailing behind her like confused ducklings. As their cars disappeared down the gravel road, our 200 guests broke into spontaneous applause and cheering. Judge Hayes arrived 15 minutes later, not for the court hearing, but as our wedding officiant. David Chen had asked him to perform the ceremony as a personal favor, and Hayes had agreed to help make sure our wedding happened exactly as planned. "Dearly beloved," Judge Hayes began, his voice carrying across the pasture, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Tom and Emily Morrison, and also to demonstrate that love, justice, and proper legal documentation can overcome any obstacle." The ceremony was perfect. Emily's vows made everyone cry. My vows made everyone laugh. We exchanged rings under the sunflower arch, while the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. But the best part came during the reception when David Chen stood up to make a toast. "To Tom and Emily," he said, raising his champagne glass, "who proved that the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting married with proper permits and legal documentation." The crowd roared with laughter and applause. But the real satisfaction came Monday morning when Victoria Blackwood and her lawyer appeared in Judge Hayes' courtroom for the emergency hearing. Hayes had spent the weekend reviewing David's evidence of HOA misconduct. The violations were extensive, fraudulent boundary claims, improper legal proceedings, harassment campaigns, and abuse of authority. But the most damaging evidence was Victoria's own correspondence, which showed a clear pattern of personal vendetta rather than community governance. "Mrs. Blackwood," Judge Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "your organization has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against Mr. Morrison, based on fraudulent claims of authority over property that was never properly included in your HOA boundaries." "Counselor," Hayes cut him off, "good faith doesn't include filing restraining orders to shut down legally permitted weddings. This court finds that the Riverside Estates HOA has violated Mr. Morrison's due process rights, engaged in fraudulent enforcement actions, and abused legal procedures for personal vendetta." The judge's ruling was comprehensive and devastating. The HOA was ordered to pay $15,000 in damages for harassment and legal costs. Victoria was personally liable for $5,000 in additional penalties for abuse of authority. The restraining order was permanently dissolved, and the HOA was prohibited from any further enforcement actions against my property. But Hayes wasn't finished. This court is also referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation of potential HOA fraud and racketeering violations. "Mrs. Blackwood, your organization may face criminal charges for your conduct." Victoria left the courthouse looking like someone had run over her dog. Her lawyer quit that afternoon. 3 members of the HOA board resigned within a week, citing irreconcilable differences with current leadership. The State Attorney General's investigation took 6 months, but the results were worth waiting for. Victoria Blackwood was charged with fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority. The Riverside Estates HOA was dissolved entirely, and affected property owners received compensation for fraudulent fines and enforcement costs. Emily and I spent our first year of marriage fixing up the ranch, planting gardens, and raising chickens. We hosted a harvest party in October with proper permits, of course, and invited everyone who'd supported us during the wedding crisis. Victoria's house went up for sale in November. According to the real estate listing, she and her husband were relocating for new opportunities. Translation: they were running away from the legal and financial consequences of her actions. The best part? Victoria's house sold for $30,000 less than the asking price because potential buyers were scared off by the dissolved HOA and ongoing legal drama. Sometimes, karma has a sense of humor. Emily and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary by renewing our vows in the same pasture, surrounded by the same friends and family who'd witnessed Victoria's downfall. Judge Hayes officiated again, and this time there were no process servers, no police cars, and no HOA board members trying to ruin our day. Just love, laughter, and the satisfaction of knowing that bullies don't always win. These days, when people ask me about our wedding, I tell them it was perfect not despite the drama, but because of it. Victoria Blackwood tried to destroy the most important day of our lives, and instead, she gave us the most amazing story we'll ever have. And every time we drive past the spot where her house used to be now owned by a lovely young couple with 3 kids and a vegetable garden, Emily squeezes my hand and smiles. "Think we should start an HOA?" She jokes. "Absolutely not," I always reply. "I've seen what happens when power goes to people's heads." But sometimes, late at night when we're sitting on our porch, listening to the chickens settle in for the night. I wonder if Victoria learned anything from our battle. I hope she did. I hope she learned that legal authority comes with legal responsibility, and that trying to destroy someone's happiness has consequences. But mostly, I just enjoy my wife, my property, and the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win completely. And next year, we're thinking about hosting a big anniversary party. With proper permits, of course. Because unlike some people, we actually know how to follow the law while still living exactly the way we want. I think Judge Hayes would approve. After all, he's the one who taught us that the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting married with perfect legal documentation. But the story doesn't end with Victoria's exile and our perfect anniversary party. Sometimes the universe has a sense of poetic justice that goes beyond what any court can deliver. 2 years after our wedding, Emily and I were sitting on our front porch, enjoying Sunday morning coffee, when a familiar black SUV pulled into our driveway. My blood pressure spiked for a moment, old habits from the HOA war, until I saw who stepped out of the driver's seat. It was Officer Martinez, but he wasn't in uniform. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt, and he had a woman and 2 young kids with him. "Mr. Morrison," he called out with a genuine smile. "Hope you don't mind us stopping by. I wanted to introduce you to my family." Martinez's wife turned out to be Elena, a veterinarian who specialized in farm animals. Their kids Maria, age 8, and Carlos, age 6, immediately gravitated toward Emily's chicken coop like they'd found buried treasure. "We're looking for property in this area," Elena explained. "Miguel told us about your place and how you fought off that crazy HOA. We want somewhere we can have horses and maybe some goats." That's when Miguel Martinez told us the rest of the story, the part we'd never heard about Victoria's final downfall. "After your wedding situation, we started getting complaints about the HOA almost weekly," he said. "Noise violations, harassment calls, people claiming their neighbors were violating CC&Rs that didn't actually exist. Victoria had turned that whole development into a war zone. It turned out that Victoria's obsession with controlling our wedding had been just the tip of the iceberg. After losing our case, she doubled down on enforcement actions against other properties, trying to prove that her authority was still absolute. But now people knew they could fight back. She went after the Hendersons for having the wrong color mailbox," Elena laughed. "Then the Washingtons for planting tomatoes instead of flowers. By the time she tried to find the O'Briens for letting their 10-year-old daughter keep a pet rabbit, the entire neighborhood was ready to revolt. The final straw came when Victoria tried to ban Christmas decorations that weren't architecturally consistent with community standards. She sent violation notices to every house with lights, inflatable lawn decorations, or religious displays, claiming they violated the aesthetic guidelines. That's when I got called to the development for a domestic disturbance," Martinez continued. Victoria had physically removed a nativity scene from the Johnson family's yard. When Mr. Johnson confronted her about it, she called us claiming he was threatening her. But when Martinez arrived, he found Victoria standing in the Johnsons' front yard with a crowbar, having dismantled not just the nativity scene, but also their mailbox, garden gnomes, and porch decorations. She was screaming at Mrs. Johnson about community standards while holding pieces of a broken ceramic angel. "I had to arrest her for destruction of property and disturbing the peace," Martinez said. She spent Christmas Eve in county lookup, ranting about HOA authority to anyone who would listen. Emily nearly choked on her coffee. "She spent Christmas in jail?" "Gets better," Martinez grinned. The story made the local paper. HOA president arrested for destroying Christmas decorations. After that, property values in the development tanked. Nobody wanted to buy into a neighborhood where the HOA president was literally destroying people's holiday displays with power tools. Within 6 months of Victoria's Christmas arrest, 8 of the 12 houses in Riverside Estates were on the market. The remaining homeowners voted to dissolve what was left of the HOA and remove all deed restrictions. The development that Victoria had tried to turn into her personal kingdom became just another collection of houses with no rules, no fees, and no president with delusions of grandeur. So now it's just regular neighborhood, Martinez concluded. People put up whatever decorations they want, paint their houses any color they like, and mind their own business. Kind of revolutionary concept, right? We invited the Martinez family to stay for lunch, and by the end of the afternoon, Elena was making plans to look at properties in our area. Their kids had named all of Emily's chickens and were already asking if we needed help with farm chores. "You know," Elena said as they were getting ready to leave, "Miguel told me about your wedding day, how you had all those permits and legal documents ready. That was brilliant." "Just did my job," I said. "No," she shook her head. "You did more than that. You showed people that bullies can be beaten if you know how to fight back properly." After they left, Emily and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set over our pasture. The chickens were settling in for the night. The garden was producing more tomatoes than we could eat, and life was exactly as peaceful as we dreamed it would be. "Think Victoria learned her lesson?" Emily asked, the same question she'd asked dozens of times over the past 2 years. "I hope so," I said, "but honestly, I don't really care anymore." And that was true. For the first year after our wedding, I'd found myself checking court records to see if Victoria was facing new charges, or wondering if she'd learned anything from her spectacular downfall. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped caring about Victoria Blackwood and started just enjoying the life Emily and I had built together. 3 months later, we got our answer about whether Victoria had learned anything. It came in the form of a certified letter, not a harassment notice this time, but a formal apology written on plain white paper with no embossed logos or fancy letterhead. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, I want to apologize for my behavior during your wedding preparations and the harassment you endured because of my actions. I realize now that I allowed my desire for control to override my judgment and basic human decency. You deserve to celebrate your wedding in peace, and I'm sorry that I tried to take that away from you. I hope you can forgive me, and I wish you both happiness in your marriage and your beautiful home. Sincerely, Victoria Blackwood." The letter was postmarked from Arizona. According to the return address, Victoria and her husband had moved to a retirement community outside Phoenix, the kind of place where someone else makes all the rules and residents just have to follow them. Emily read the letter twice, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. She actually apologized. "Took her long enough. Do you think we should write back?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching our chickens scratch around in the dirt and listening to the wind rustle through the oak trees that had been on this property longer than either of us had been alive. "No," I said finally. "Some things are better left in the past." Emily nodded and folded the letter carefully. "What should we do with it?" "Keep it," I said. "Someday, our kids might want to hear the story about how their parents got married, despite a crazy HOA president who thought she could stop true love with legal documents." "Our kids?" I grinned. "Well, we'll need someone to help take care of all those chickens." Emily kissed me then, right there on the porch swing, where we'd planned our wedding and plotted our defense against Victoria's harassment campaign. The sun was setting behind the barn, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and everything was exactly as it should be. 6 months later, Emily announced she was pregnant. We celebrated by expanding the chicken coop and adding a vegetable garden where Victoria had once claimed we couldn't plant anything without HOA approval. Our daughter was born the following spring, and we named her Hope partly because she represented our hopes for the future, and partly because hope had been what got us through the darkest days of our battle with the HOA. Hope took her first steps in the pasture where we'd gotten married. She learned to walk by chasing chickens around the yard and helping Emily collect eggs every morning. Her first word was mama, but her second was chicken, which seemed perfectly appropriate for a kid growing up on a ranch. When Hope turned 2, we threw a birthday party in the barn with proper permits naturally. Officer Martinez and his family came, along with Judge Hayes, David Chen, and all the friends and family who'd supported us during our wedding crisis. We served barbecue and birthday cake, and Hope spent the entire party toddling around in her cowgirl boots, charming everyone with her gap-toothed smile. During the party, David Chen pulled me aside with a knowing grin. "Tom, I've got some news I think you'll find interesting." "What's that?" "Remember Victoria's lawyer, the nervous kid who looked like he wanted to disappear during the court hearing?" "Yeah, what about him?" "He's running for county attorney. His campaign platform is fighting HOA abuse and protecting property rights. Apparently, your case inspired him to specialize in representing people against overzealous homeowners associations." I laughed out loud. "You're kidding." "Nope. His campaign ads feature a picture of a wedding cake with the slogan "Some things are too important to let bullies ruin." He's leading in the polls. Emily overheard and joined our conversation. "That's amazing. So Victoria accidentally created her own nemesis?" "Looks that way," David nodded. "Sometimes, justice takes a while to work itself out, but it usually gets there eventually." As the party wound down and guests started heading home, Judge Hayes found Emily and me cleaning up in the barn. Hope had fallen asleep in her stroller, exhausted from a day of being the center of attention. "Beautiful party," Hayes said. "Beautiful family. You two have built something special here." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Thanks for everything you did to help us." Hayes waved off my gratitude. "I just did my job. You two did the hard work of standing up for yourselves and fighting back the right way. Any regrets about how it all went down?" Hayes thought for a moment, watching Hope sleep peacefully in her stroller. "Only one. I wish more people had your courage to fight back against bullies who think they can control other people's lives. The world would be a better place if everyone knew they had the right to defend their happiness." That night, after all the guests had gone home and Hope was tucked into her crib, Emily and I sat on our porch swing, listening to the night sounds of our ranch. Crickets chirping, an owl hooting somewhere in the oak trees, and the gentle rustling of chickens settling in their coop. "Think we'll ever have to deal with anything like Victoria again?" Emily asked. "I hope not," I said. "But if we do, at least we know how to fight back." Emily smiled and took my hand. "Plus, we've got Hope now. Got to make sure she grows up in a world where bullies don't get to win. She'll know how to stand up for herself," I promised. "We'll make sure of that." And we did. As Hope grew up, we told her the story of our wedding and Victoria's attempts to stop it. We taught her that standing up to bullies isn't about being mean or vengeful. It's about knowing your rights, following the law, and never letting anyone else's anger or fear stop you from living your life. Hope learned to read using court documents and permit applications, which probably makes us the only parents in the county who used legal paperwork as bedtime stories. But she understood from an early age that knowledge is power, that documents matter, and that sometimes the best way to fight bullies is to know the rules better than they do. When Hope turned 16, she wrote her high school civics project about our battle with Victoria Blackwood. Her paper was titled "How My Parents' Wedding Taught Me About Justice, Due Process, and the Importance of Proper Documentation." She got an A+ and won the countywide award for Best Student Essay on Local Government. The essay ended with a line that made Emily and me proud beyond words. "My parents taught me that the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even, it's building a life so good that your enemy's attempts to destroy it only make you stronger." Victoria Blackwood tried to ruin our wedding day and failed spectacularly. But in failing, She gave us something more valuable than a perfect ceremony. She gave us a story about love conquering bureaucracy, justice triumphing over pettiness, and the power of knowing how to fight back the right way. And every year, on our wedding anniversary, Emily and I renew our vows in the same pasture where Victoria thought she could stop us. Hope helps us set up the chairs now, and she always insists on being our flower girl, even though she's too old for the role. "It's tradition, Mom," she always says. "You have to have a flower girl at the place where Grandma Victoria learned not to mess with the Morrison family." That's right, Hope calls Victoria Grandma Victoria, not because she's related to us, but because Victoria's defeat became such an important part of our family history that she feels like a character in our origin story. The cranky old woman who tried to stop our happy ending and instead made it more perfect than we ever imagined. The ranch is still here. Our family is thriving. Victoria Blackwood learned her lesson and moved to Arizona. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, when Hope is helping Emily collect eggs, and I'm drinking coffee on the porch swing where we planned our defense against HOA tyranny, I think about how grateful I am that Victoria picked a fight she couldn't win. Because in trying to destroy our happiness, she taught us exactly how strong our love really was. Sometimes, that's the best gift your enemies can give you, the chance to prove that nothing they do can stop you from living exactly the life you want. The ranch is still here. Victoria Blackwood is not. And that's exactly how this story was always meant to end.